And the judge in Sean Diddy Combs' trafficking trial is expected to decide this morning whether to throw out a portion of last week's testimony. It concerns a witness who was called after Combs' ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura finished testifying on Friday.
I think we all knew something shady was going on behind those velvet ropes, but nobody anticipated it to be this sinister, this deliberate, and truly this extensive. Diddy's trial isn't just about his personal behavior anymore. It's peeling the mask off an entire ecosystem. I think we're finally seeing the machine behind the fame, and what's being uncovered looks less like showbiz and more like a cult disguised in designer clothes.
He was doing this kind of thing, and there's some woman who was somehow assaulted, and I somehow missed it, then I'm sorry.
How do we change? What do you see as change? You're a powerful man in this business.
There has to be a comeuppance for all of this, all of the people who are part of that chain. And then we have to make it safe for people to feel that they can talk about this. And in doing that, I think that'll scare away that kind of behavior. But more than anything, you're gonna have to have a warning shot over the bow of anyone who would act like.
The height of his power, and that was his legend. That was his whole kind of MO.
For decades, people have jested about trading your spirit for a music contract or performing acts to secure a part. But what happens when those quips start sounding like verified reality? What happens when people who were actually there step up and say, yeah, it's all real, it was worse than you thought, and I saw it with my own eyes?
Unfortunately, we're all going to take a disgusting trip to his seedy, awful world. You know, the man has no class. He has no kindness in his dark, dark heart. And he's depraved. That's my opinion. This is a depraved, disgusting individual.
That's what's happening right now in sworn testimony under oath with names, dates, and receipts. And what's astonishing is how swiftly the quiet is shattering. Individuals are identifying culprits, detailing events, accusing others. And I think it's shaking Hollywood to its core because for the first time.
And the people who worked for him were like, you know, I'm coming here to make good movies. Miramax was the place, really the place that was making great stuff in the 90s. This level of criminal sexual predation is not something that I ever thought was going on. Absolutely not. I knew the story about Gwyneth from Ben because he was with her after Brad.
It's not a YouTuber, it's not a Reddit thread, it's not a TikTok rant. It's in a courtroom under penalty of perjury that makes this distinct, that makes it perilous. This isn't a controversy anymore, it's a judgment. I think Diddy's trial is turning into the first real exposure of what people have been murmuring about for ages, that some of the grandest careers in the industry were purchased with more than currency.
Than money.
You know, Harvey would talk to me about women that he'd had affairs with. I didn't necessarily believe him, quite honestly, because to believe him would be to believe kind of the worst of some actresses who were friends of mine.
I knew he was you know, I mean, he was proud of that. You had to spend about 5 minutes with him to know that he was a bully, he was intimidating.
They were bought with compliance, quiet involvement. And now that quiet is gone and the figures at the top know it. Let's begin with the term that sounds like it was torn from a discarded thriller script, freak off. I mean, what even is that? I think the name alone is unsettling.
Guys, they found underground tunnels at Diddy's homes. This was first brought up by Shadow of Ezra, where he talked about the underground tunnels in Diddy's luxurious Los Angeles mansion. It was an underwater swimming tunnel leading to a mysterious grotto, reminiscent of an ancient and modern human use of caves. Now, this is all alleged, of course, but they say that this tunnel connects to the Playboy Mansion. You guys remember that? Hugh Hefner, the guy who lived with all those women in his mansion? There's no available evidence right now. However, reports are noting that Combs' mansions do have a pool with an underwater swimming tunnel. They say it's not connected to the Playboy Mansion, but there is a reason why the Playboy Mansion keeps coming up. 10 years ago, they were building underground tunnels to the Playboy Mansion for people like Jack Nicholson for his birthday. So this way, they don't have to go through the outside, but go underground in secret to the Playboy Mansion to do God knows what. You can see the sketches here of these underground tunnels being built. They were working on it, and it was supposed to connect celebrities like Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, Michael Jackson, just to name a few. As reported by People magazine, these underground tunnels to the Playboy Mansion were sealed off in the 1980s. The question is, do you believe that? Stay safe and be smart.
You don't label something a freak off unless it's meant to test limits, unless it's meant to be forbidden. And these weren't just raucous gatherings with loud tunes and stars unwinding. No, these were exclusive, phone-free high surveillance psychologically. Orchestrated events, what's been described in court, is chilling.
And what's really going to be interesting is the parade of celebrities who we expect to be mentioned and or called into that courtroom. You know, people who we hadn't heard about prior, like Mike Myers, you know, Austin Powers, Mike Myers. Why is he getting called? Why is he on the witness list? That'll be fascinating. And then, of course, there are the no-name, quote unquote, women who are going to have to find every ounce of courage they have to sit on that witness stand across from someone who can buy and sell their whole families, who is accused of behaving violent in the past toward both male and female adversaries or so-called friends who ticked him off. You know, he allegedly firebombed this one rapper's car for allegedly being interested in the same woman. There are questions about whether he's potentially done worse than that to others. And these young women with no power and no money who could put him behind bars for the rest of his life have to sit there, look him in the eye and say what he did to them. Now that's going to be a very tall order. There's already been a question about whether one has bailed. They couldn't find this one witness late last week, and the prosecution wasn't sure whether she'd left, pieced out. And even if they don't piece out, will they stick by their stories on the stand?
There were security checks, staff trained to ignore everything guests allegedly told, not to speak of what they saw. That doesn't sound like a house party. That sounds like a rite of passage. And that's what I believe. These freak-offs were not festivities, but trials. You were being observed, judged, recorded, and you either went along with the flow or you got cut out of the circle. And here's what really gets me. These events happened over and over with the same people, the same locations, the same setups. That's not wild coincidence. That's ritual, that's ceremony, that's a system. I think this was Hollywood's way of branding its insiders. You weren't just networking. You were being initiated. You were being marked. Because once you've been to one of these, you're no longer on the outside, you're part of it. And if you ever try to talk, you're not just risking a lawsuit, you're risking your whole career. That's not a party, that's a trap. And I think people are finally starting to realize how deep it goes. Now let's get into that binder. Yes, an actual binder in 2025 in court held up like a sorted little playbook inside. Names, pictures, contact info, specifics, preferences. Some of the individuals listed had records. Others were rumored to be repeat participants. But this wasn't just a hookup list. This looked like a casting sheet for ritual roles. I think the moment that binder hit the evidence table, the room should have gone silent because nobody casually keeps a manual like that unless they're running a machine. This wasn't about pleasure. This was about selection, recruitment, obedience, who does what, who's paired with who gets invited back. You know what that sounds like to me? Indoctrination. And here's where it gets even bleaker, allegedly. Some of these events were filmed not for amusement, for control. Because once you've been captured, once there's a file with your name on it, once you're in that binder, you don't speak out. You don't step out of line. I think this binder was never just for reference, it was for leverage. I think it was designed to keep people silent, to keep people in check. So if you ever became a problem, boom, there's footage, there's names, there's evidence. Try walking into a press interview or landing a film. Deal after that kind of thing accidentally leaks. This isn't a scandal, this is infrastructure. And I think Diddy wasn't just throwing parties. He was maintaining a system that made sure people stayed loyal, silent, and scared. And now that the binder's out in the open, I think it's only a matter of time before others start flipping just to keep their names out of the next courtroom exhibit. This is where the hairs on my neck really stood up, because the second you start hearing familiar names, prominent names, you grasp. This isn't just about Diddy. I think this network extends far beyond what anyone's prepared to acknowledge. I mean, think about it. Kanye West, Usher, Michael B. Jordan, Kid Cudi, all reportedly named or mentioned in connection to this trial in some way. That's not tabloid chatter, that's not Twitter speculation, that's testimony, that's legal documentation. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying every one of them was involved, but let's not play dumb either. I think when your name gets tied to something like this, especially under oath, you're not just a bystander, you're not randomly included. You were there, you were close, or at the absolute minimum, you knew, you saw something, you heard something, you felt the energy shift at those events. And here's the thing that hits hardest for me. The silence, the eerie, deafening, calculated silence from the A-listers. Nobody speaking up to deny anything. No public statements, no denials, just a quiet, unraveling PR teams doing what? They do best scrubbing, editing, archiving. You've got celebs unfollowing Diddy overnight, suddenly wiping entire albums of pictures, posing on red carpets like they've never even heard his name. Please, the internet doesn't forget, and I think they know that. That's why they're running. That's why they're deleting, because once your name is said in the same breath as a Hollywood ritual scandal, it sticks forever. Whether it's true or not, it's there. And what about the sealed testimony, the stuff we haven't even seen yet? The whispered names that haven't been made public? You think Diddy's going down alone? I don't. I think the sealed stuff holds the names. Everyone's afraid to say out loud the ones with real power, the ones that own studios, that greenlight franchises, that run the labels. And if those names ever make it out, that's when we stop talking about a scandal and start talking about a collapse. Out of all the testimonies so far, this one hit the hardest. Because Kid Cudi didn't just tell a story. He issued a caution, one that I think everyone needs to hear. According to court testimony, Diddy allegedly broke into Cudi's home in 2011. Let me repeat. That broke into his home. That alone is insane. But it gets worse. Because just weeks after that, Cudi's car exploded, not crashed, not towed, exploded, and we're seriously supposed to believe that was just bad luck. I think that's the kind of thing that makes you realize this isn't just ego or jealousy or industry beef. This is about control. This is about what happens when you refuse to play the game, when you speak up, when you try to protect someone. The system doesn't want protected. Cudi allegedly tried to warn Cassie. He cared. He saw what was happening and didn't look the other way. And if what he's saying is true, that act of decency might have cost him his safety. Because let's be real, a car doesn't just explode out of nowhere. That's targeted. That's deliberate. That's a message. I think this moment in the trial flipped the energy. It made everything real, because up until that point we were hearing about weird parties and binders and strange behavior. But this was violence. This was retaliation. This was a consequence, a punishment for stepping out of line. And if it happened to Cudi, what about everyone else who wanted to speak but never did? Who almost came forward, who backed out at the last second because they were scared? The same thing might happen to them. I think this is why so many people stayed silent for so long. Because it wasn't just about getting blacklisted. It was about real-life consequences, about knowing too much, about trying to protect someone and paying the price. And let's not forget Cudi. Still showed up, still told the story, still risked it all to pull back the curtain. To me, that makes him one of the only people in this whole nightmare who's actually acting like a human being, not a brand, not a puppet, not a pawn. And that's exactly why I believe him now. Here's where it crosses into straight-up horror movie territory. One of the escorts he literally goes by, the Punisher, testified that Diddy would show up to these events wearing a veil. A veil, not a mask. A veil like some kind of ceremonial shroud. And people still think this is just about parties. I think this is theatrical on purpose, ritualistic by design. These weren't random outfits. These were roles being played, power dynamics being established. I think they were using costume and mystery to enforce hierarchy, who's dominant, who's submissive, who's in, who's out. That is initiation energy. And it's not even subtle. I think we need to stop acting like this is one man's downfall. This trial is peeling back layers of an entire system. A system that rewards silence, that punishes honesty, that elevates those willing to play by twisted rules. And I think this system is cracking with every testimony, with every leaked document. With every celebrity reaction or lack of one, the public is waking up. We're finally seeing how much manipulation is baked into the very foundation of fame. Not talent, not luck, but compliance. And for anyone who's ever felt like Hollywood was one giant illusion. I think this trial is proving that we were right all along. I think what we're witnessing right now is historic. Not just because of the drama, not just because of the names, but because of what it reveals about how the entertainment industry really works behind the scenes. The parties were rituals, the binders were rosters, the veils were symbols, the silence that was the contract. But now the silence is breaking. And once people start talking, you can't put that truth back in the bottle. So if you've ever felt like something was off in Hollywood, if you've ever wondered why certain people rise while others vanish, I think you already know what this trial is. Proving the game was rigged, the rules were dark,